in 2003. And she, I just walked in the door. I had said hello, shook her hand. She showed me where to sit, and she started pretty immediately. She said, well, I can tell by the position of the sun in your chart that even if your father had been around, you'd still be disappointed in him. So after I picked myself up off the floor, because she's right, I thought, I said to her, I will believe anything you say. And then I also thought to myself, I have to figure out how she knew that. And so if you look at my chart today, it's clear as day, and any astrologer who's trained would see it in a second. It took me a few years to figure that actual position out. And it takes a long time to study astrology. You can learn what each piece means, what the sun is, what Venus is, what Mars is, what Saturn does. You know that pretty quickly, but pulling it all together and sort of understanding what it really means kind of in the real world, it takes a lot of time. So I've been giving readings professionally since 2013, and I continue today. As Abby said, we're offering a 15% discount today, and my website is howardastrologer.com. So you can see more pictures of me and read about my whole approach there, and email me from there as well. But what is astrology anyway? It's really the study, technically it's the study of how the planets and the cosmos affect us down here on Earth. But we use it as a tool. It's a tool about awareness of yourself and awareness of the world around you. So if you're paying attention, it can help. And the thing that has made astrology so satisfying for me is it explains what's going on in the world and also in my life. So Abby, can I share?
Yes, you have the screen share.
Okay, I'm just going to show you. Can you all see that chart? That's the chart of the sky 10 minutes ago. So if somebody was born 10 minutes ago when this talk officially began at 6, this is what the sky looked like. As you can imagine, there's a lot going on up there right now. And to the trained eye, you can see here, can you see my cursor, Abby? Can you see me moving the?
Yeah.
Okay.
You're over the Zoom talk right now.
Yes.
So on the right side of your screen.
Okay, can you see me here? That's Saturn, that's Pluto and Jupiter. Can everyone see where I'm indicating? In Capricorn, I'm circling that. Those 3 planets in Capricorn have basically controlled our year, and they'll continue to do so pretty much until December. We have Mars here, squaring those. That's a 90-degree angle. And that's a pretty tough jab. That's like somebody at a dinner table from, sitting 90 degrees from you, screaming at you. And so it was this setup with these outer planets, basically, in Capricorn. Capricorn's the sign of structure, institutions, tradition, changing all of that. Pluto's the planet of transformation. So when Pluto moved slowly. So Pluto moved into Capricorn in 2008, right when the financial crisis started. And that was no coincidence. Capricorn rules the financial system, and also government institutions. Saturn moved in there in 2019, last year, and it's been traveling back and forth. Back in January, we had a conjunction here with Saturn and Pluto, which marks a 30-year cycle. And we have Neptune in its own sign of Pisces. And then it also matches up with the world axis. So when you understand what all these things do and how all these planets interrelate, you can see that, you know, something big on the world stage was going to happen. We didn't know what it was, but we knew it was going to be something. 30 years ago, at the last conjunction of Saturn and Pluto, it was in Libra, which is over here where Mercury is now. That was the AIDS crisis. So every 30 years or so, we get something big, spectacular change that's reflected in what that sign, the sign in which it occurs, happens. And so this is Capricorn, this is structures, this is governments. So Jupiter there sort of expands things. It's often the planet of good luck, and it does bring good luck, but it also it'll make a good setup better, but it'll make a bad situation worse. And in this case, it's magnified what we're going through now. And then Mars is a trigger. I mean, Mars rules firearms. Mars is the warrior. So Mars transited over all of this back in January. Back in March, and that's what triggered our current situation. Then it's traveled down now to Aries, which is the sign it rules, so it's particularly strong, and it's squared 90-degree exact angles past those three planets. It's now retrograde. It appears to go backward in the sky, and from our view on Earth, it's going to square them again. And then when it goes direct in November after the election, it's going to go direct again over those. So we're not done. We're not out of the woods until all this moves into another sign. Saturn will move into Aquarius, thank goodness, in late December. Jupiter will conjunct that then, and Mars will have moved on.
So Howard, you're saying that the prediction at the moment is that we'll see some change by the end of December.
We're going to see a lot more. I don't want to say chaos. I'm trying not to say chaos. We're going to have a pretty tumultuous environment. Let's call it that.
Certainly, the elections are coming, so.
Certainly through the election.
I think anyone's expecting a smooth process for the elections. I mean, certainly we're all pretty aware of all kinds of shenanigans that are already happening with the election. So right. It's not a surprise that would continue. Do you think that there'll be any resolution to that on election day, or is it going to take time?
It's going to take time because during the run-up to the election and up until the day of the election, Mercury is going to be retrograde. Mercury is communication. Mercury would govern anything that has to do with the process of voting. When it's retrograde, all that goes awry. So to answer your question, no, we're not going to know. And it's possible we won't know until December. We should be prepared for that. By January and by the first quarter, I predict things will settle down because these really difficult aspects, these squares that you see, will have passed. Mars will have moved on by that time. Mercury will be direct, and we'll have Saturn and Jupiter in Aquarius, which is a much easier sign for those planets. And it'll set the stage. I mean, it's no surprise, no coincidence really that, Me Too, Black Lives Matter, the environment, a lot of those issues have become much more prominent. And with those planets and those signs, we're going to see a lot more attention on those issues then. So this is stirring up things so that they can be put out on, so that they can be dealt with and addressed properly and responsibly. It's part of a bigger process. So this was an example of what's known as mundane astrology, when an astrologer takes a look at what's going on up in the sky and analyzes it and makes predictions about what can happen. It also, astrology also affects us personally, each one of us. And so I will just put up an example of that. I was going to use my own chart, but I didn't open it. Hang on. That's the one we want. This software is called Solar Fire, and it's great. You can do all kinds of fun things with it. So on the inside is my natal chart. So I was born November 14, 1964, believe it or not. And this was a map of the sky at that time. If you want to see the signature of my father, I could show you. The sun is the father. It squares Saturn. Saturn's responsibility, Saturn's restriction, Saturn's also can be absent. Saturn tells you, you got to do it on your own. And so with that configuration in a birth chart, I always wonder, was your father strict or was your father even around? And then we have Neptune here, right next to my sun. That's known as a conjunction.
Howard, can you stop for a second? Where can you use your cursor to show us where on your natal chart is the sun part?
Oh, right here. Can you see me moving the cursor?
No.
Oh.
I'm moving my cursor. So can you see my cursor moving?
I can't see your cursor. I thought you could use mine. You could see mine.
Well, yours has a big cross in front of your name next to the number 10.
Oh.
Calculated chart. See if you move it. Yeah.
Can you see my what can you see on the screen?
So I can see your current chart preview, which is Howard Moore natal chart.
Yeah.
And it's from your birth date. So the sun sign, the symbol for the sun is going to be, I see water.
Oh, wait, what are you looking at?
Oh, now I can see your cursor. Your cursor's moving now. But it's right on Howard Moore in the calculated charts.
Oh, I see. Okay, if I do that, what do you see? Do you see anything different now?
No.
Okay, hang on. Share, screen share, new share.
So just sort of thinking, so what you were saying, if I'm correct, here we go.
Is that it?
You've gotten into the whole, the whole screen is on the chart now, yeah.
Okay, and does that say Howard Moore?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Sorry about that. And can you see the cross moving around?
Yes.
Okay. Oh, good. All right. Sorry, everybody. Yeah. So the sun here.
Right, is where you said your father's.
Yeah. So the sun's the father. It's also your ego. It's sort of a list of specific things. It's kind of a broad list, but it's actually very specific. It's the self, it's the ego, it's where you shine. It's also the men in your life, often the father, as well. So Neptune is right next to it, and Neptune's sun can mean several things. Father could be a priest, or a religious or a very spiritual person. Father could be an alcoholic. Father could have a sort of a substance problem. But sort of at the end, there's often an element of idealization and disappointment that happens when you see that. So putting that all together, now I know why she said that. But it took a long time to figure it out. It's like, what is she looking at? But she's since become a mentor, and we've worked a lot together. Anyway, that was a tangent.
Well, but I think what I was kind of wondering is, like, Howard, what is it that you would think would be beneficial for someone to know that kind of information, right? Like, I know my father's a jerk. I've known my father's a jerk since I was 8 years old. Why is it beneficial for me now, having my natal chart done by you, to know more about what my chart says about my relationship with my father?
Excellent question. Can you still see this chart?
Yep.
Okay. It took me a long time to kind of figure out my own identity. And it was because of that configuration. I was always extremely hard on myself. And I suffered from a pretty strong lack of self-confidence when I was young. And that came from that square from Saturn to the sun. Saturn tells you you're not good enough. And Saturn tells you, and you sort of feel that way up into usually around 40 is when that changes. So it's powerful, and it's a lot to get over. So when I see this in a young person's chart, Saturn squaring the sun or the moon or another personal planet like Mercury, Mars, Venus, there's going to be fear around what those planets represent in that person's life. And then Neptune, for me, kind of made it worse because Neptune diffuses. Neptune is the planet of smoke and mirrors. It's also about inspiration, but it's also about self-undoing. So there was a lot of, I would find I would sabotage myself in relationships, for example. I didn't have a strong sense of an identity to fall back on when I was young. That took a long time to develop. So had I known that earlier, I feel like I could have moved forward with more awareness about myself and how I'm wired there. I'll tell you something that's happened recently, just to overshare. Venus here is, can you see my cursor circling Venus?
Yep.
Venus is relationships, and Venus is in Libra, and that's great for many things. Venus rules the sign of Libra, so to have a Libra Venus is wonderful. Because that's the sign of relationships and it's the planet of relationships. However, the downside of that, in combination with somebody who doesn't really know who he is all that well early on, and who doesn't have a lot of, who's always kind of has this inner voice telling him, you're not good enough, that Venus is going to get tripped up. and I ended up always being the one to compromise in relationships. Libra's the sign of diplomacy. So this is a Venus that really wants to please. And this is a Venus that's going to eat a lot of nonsense to make a relationship work. So here, I'll just overshare something with you with another chart. Can you see this chart, Abby? There are this one chart around the other.
No, we still are on the same.
Okay,
chart.
hang on. Can you see that?
Yep.
Okay. Here, let me see if I can move this. Can you see this moving?
Yeah.
Okay. So a couple of years ago, I had what's known as a transit. And can you see, this is Uranus. Can you see me circling Uranus? So that crossed my ascendant. And I knew it was coming. And I wondered, how is that going to manifest in my life? And Uranus moves pretty slowly. So I thought I could feel it coming. I wasn't really sure. Uranus is the planet of, it's the planet of individuality. It can be the planet of rebellion. It can really fire you up, and it's the planet of genius. It's the planet of the future and forward thinking. And I wondered, well, am I going to become like a technology person? That's one suggestion, one thing that it could do. It's also the planet of things that happen suddenly, sort of getting hit out of the blue by something. And I thought, is something going to hit me out of the blue? Am I going to have like a flash of something? And what I feared was that I was going to become very rebellious. And I was going to start sort of fighting back against the world. And that didn't happen. Instead, what happened was something actually that was really pretty beautiful for me. And I think for everybody, actually. The ascendant, this point in the chart, is how you meet the world. And it's a point of your identity. And it's always opposite this point here, which is relationships. So it's yourself and the other. And the idea is needing to integrate those two so that you behave, your role in relationships is of awareness. And you're also meeting the world and presenting yourself and presenting your identity in a noble, responsible way. And Uranus really heightened that. And that's when I began to realize that my relationships, many of them were imbalanced. And I was usually the one making the compromises so that I could make the relationships work. Uranus going over that made me realize I don't need to make those compromises. People will like me anyway. People will like me for me. But it took that, but I noticed the quality of my relationships changing, and they certainly became more satisfying for me personally. And I think they became more satisfying for my friends because I wasn't always saying, oh yes, that sounds great. I was adding more. I was thinking, no, I don't think that's a good idea, but let's do this instead. And so the whole enterprise, the whole sort of relationship enterprise became elevated. So that's one example of how astrology can work and how knowing how you're wired, you can be prepared for something that's coming. what the possible outcomes might be, and the themes to pay attention to during that time.
Howard, can we shift maybe slightly from, we can always come back to this particular screen. I'm just was wondering if maybe you wouldn't expand a little bit more about like what people, like in the last 6 months, maybe even a year, what most people are coming to you to know about, to learn about. I think that there's sort of this kind of, I know when I tell people, oh, astrology, like half the people sort of laugh in my face about it, you know? And I think that they kind of think about looking in the daily news at like, oh, love is going to cross your threshold, blah, blah, blah. When in fact, you know, I know what you do is so much deeper than that. And actually you have a specialty specifically in your work. And I thought maybe you might want to talk a little bit about that.
Sure. Yeah, sun sign astrology has been a blessing and a curse. I think more of a curse because it's popularized astrology, but it doesn't express that there's so much more to it. And so people think, well, you know, I'm an Aquarius, and it begins and ends there. And it doesn't. Only your sun may be an Aquarius. You also have the moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars in other signs, all interrelating. And it forms a complex web that is reflective of our complex selves. It's about planets and signs and houses, and it goes pretty deep. People have been coming to me this past year for, you know, a number of things. I mean, everyone's feeling the tension. Excuse me, everyone's feeling the tension, but it's affecting us in different ways. So it's affecting some people professionally. It's affecting some people's health. It's affecting some people's finances. It's affecting others' relationships. You know, Abby, you know, we've talked, and I've talked to many others about people who are eager to start new ventures. And, you know, when will be a good time to get them off the ground? And this is certainly no time. I mean, you don't need an astrologer to tell you this is not a good time to begin a new venture. But it can actually be very plain in somebody's chart where, you know, it might not be the time to launch, but it is a good time to plan. Maybe do some fundraising, believe it or not. Maybe, I mean, you know, life still goes on. It's just not as robust as it was. And it's all being conducted in a different way. But, you know, I have to say, my career in astrology has been great. You know, I've been able to advance by leaps and bounds during this time, and nobody thought that would happen. It depends which part of the chart. Many things are hitting. I mean, I showed you those 3 key planets up in Capricorn. People who have planets in other cardinal signs, Aries, Cancer, Libra, and Capricorn, are going to be feeling this period really powerfully. I'm a Scorpio, so I'm getting that power actually as a sextile, which creates opportunities for me. So it's a whole different ball game. I mean, that's more, but that's one simplistic way to explain it. Does that answer the question? Kind of.
Yeah, and I think that I know that for you, you were, you know, particularly interested in how the stars relate to the financial world.
Yeah.
In the world. So Howard, of course, can tell you if love is going to be coming down your, if the stars are aligning for that. But really, I know that he was always very interested in how the astrology of the world's financial systems and what's going on with the world financially.
Yeah, I have a strong interest just in finance in general. I've been a financial writer for quite a while, and I followed the markets. Um, so there are correlations, and there are a number of financial astrologers. Um, we each sort of have our own theories about how it all works. But basically what we watch are the outer planets for general broad cycles. And then how they're interacting with the inner planets, especially Venus and especially the sun, on how markets might move or what the sentiment of the public might be that would cause a market to move during a particular time frame. I'm getting the hang of it a lot better than I used to. It's taken a long time and a lot of observation. If you're invested in the market, we've had a little bump today. It ended not as bad as it began. We were expecting a big drop, but it wasn't as terrible in the end. So we're going to get a lot of that kind of volatility, and I think a lot of faking out. I think, though, there is going to be a more serious activity at the end of the month when Mars, as I described in the chart earlier, does its series of retrograde squares to those three key planets up in Capricorn. That's going to happen starting at the end of the month and through October. So, make sure you're conservative, make sure you have some cash. It's not going to be a disaster. The economy is still, it's still in good shape, believe it or not. I mean, yes, we're sort of in a pause. We're sort of certainly in a year of panic. And the economy is indeed contracting, but we're not going to get a real full-blown sort of recession, say a la 2008, for another couple of years. There's a point that we track the North Node to indicate that. And the time for that would be when the North Node is transiting Aquarius, which is going to be in 2024.
Yes, I was wondering how
I'm
you
looking at the train schedule of the
is there
planets.
a natal chart for NASDAQ, I mean, for us, when we get our natal chart done, it's very, very helpful for Howard to have the exact time of your birth, the place of your birth, that kind of thing. However, he has done charts, I know, of people that don't know the exact time of their birth. And it's usually like you kind of check a bunch of different time slots and sort of, right, you kind of like tweak it to see like which one seems to make most sense, right, with what you're looking at.
Yes. Yeah, well, yeah.
But with an entity like the universe or the financial markets or something like that, how you said you follow for the finances, you said you're following this
Yeah, there are a couple of things to follow for finance. So for the general economy, we follow the North Node. That North Node is going to get into Aquarius in 2026, 2027. That's when the economy is going to be at a bottom. But as it moves through that sun, it'll start to rise again. And it's on basically an 18-year cycle there, which is more or less reliable when you track it back. And yes, other financial charts to use. There is a chart for the New York Stock Exchange. There are actually a couple. There's a chart for the Dow. So you can check transits against that. And there are many correlations. None of it's 100%, but you can, by tracking it, you can at least get an idea of sort of the tone and tenor of a period of time and integrate it with other indicators to sort of figure out where things are going to go. And then for cases where there's no birth time, for individuals, there's a process of rectification. So if you came to me and didn't have a birth time, you would give me a list of 8 important events in your life, events that sort of would have changed the course of your life. So a new job, you know, a career change, for example, a marriage, a birth, a death, a major relocation. So I would take those dates, see where the planets were at that time, and then back into where those points of your chart that are sensitive, which is the ascendant and the midheaven and the moon, would be located based on those dates and the planetary positions on those dates. So astrologers use mundane charts, like for countries. There are several charts for the United States. There's one that's popular called the Sibley chart. It's July, if I remember correctly, it's July 4. It's in the afternoon. I think it's around 5 o'clock. That's one, sort of the, you know, signing of the Declaration of Independence. But there are several others. There's one for a Continental Congress that took place before that date. Some astrologers use that. Other astrologers use charts of different times during the day of July 4, based on a rectification process, or, you know, others. So as with, I mean, astrologers agree on many things, but there are a lot of systemic things that there are debates about. And the US chart is one of them. So some use, you know, one, the Sibley chart, and that works, and that's, you know, reliable. Others, just because of the way they interpret things, often we use another one, and that works for them. House systems is another one, another point where
that must get very complicated.
Astrologers get contentious, yeah.
Get very complicated for countries that have been like established and broken down and established again, broken down. They must have all these different birth dates.
Exactly. For example, India's is very clear. It's midnight on the day that, you know, there was a decree and the country was created. I was talking to somebody recently about Lebanon, and around, it was around the explosion that occurred in Lebanon, and we had to talk about, well, which chart, you know, for which government, and which, you know, where do you base that? Was that, you know, Sykes-Picot, or, you know, other signings of treaties or documents that establish the nation? So sometimes you have to research, sometimes you have to sort of average out to when you're studying this kind of thing.
I have another question. Have you ever done the chart of twins?
Yes, I have.
Are their charts exactly the same?
They're not. I mean, the planetary, it's interesting that you ask. There's a theory in astrology that twins, while in the womb, make a pact, which is something like, okay, you can be the bad one if I can be the good one. Or I'm going to be the one who travels and you be the one who, always stays home in exchange for, I don't know, something else. I feel like they bargain it out kind of psychically while they're still in the womb. Gemini is the sign of twins, and it's no surprise that many twins are in fact Geminis. So that can explain a lot of that, where one embodies sort of one side, and the other sort of takes the other attributes that are still expressed by those same planets. And so you get two different expressions of Mars, two different expressions of Venus, for example. The other thing, though, with twins is they're usually born, say, even 10 minutes will make a difference in the ascendant and the midheaven, sometimes the moon. So that moves what's called the angles. And the angles are sort of basically what the whole chart hangs on. So you have the ascendant and the descendant, the midheaven, and what's known as the IC. And those move a degree every 4 minutes. So they're pretty quick. And so if you're looking at a chart, or rather looking at charts of twins, they don't necessarily appear all that different, but there are techniques called progression and solar arc, where you take the chart and you advance the points a certain amount for a certain time period. And when there are angular relationships that form within those charts, that usually reflects when events happen. So one twin might have an event happen at 4 years old, but the sibling will have that, say, 2 years later, if he were born 10 or 12 minutes later. So it affects your life in a different way. So it could be something, some big sort of thing that happens in youth that, might affect you psychologically, and it sort of would send you off in another direction. So they're very similar at their essence, but they can be expressed in different ways depending on what the signs are of their planets and the various traits that those signs embody and so forth. So
walk us through a little bit what a session with you entails.
Yeah, so usually when you come, I'll have a pretty good idea of what's going on in your life, when we sit down. People usually come when there's a big change that's either happening or imminent, and you can usually see it. So we'll often start there. Or somebody will come with a specific question. When am I going to get married? When am I going to meet the one? When am I going to get that great job? I'm really concerned about money. What's going to happen? What's my whole thing with money? So we'll take a look at that and peel that back. Or I'll just look at the chart and we'll say, okay, this is who you are. And we'll start with the sun. We'll move on to the moon, which is your emotions and your deepest needs. We'll look at the planets that are interacting with those and the signs that they're in and the houses that they're in to sort of explain, well, yeah, maybe if your father had been around, you'd still be disappointed in him. And then, so that's the first part of the reading. It's sort of an overview. And then I listen to what is resonating. So if somebody really jumps on you know, relationship issues or whatever, we do a deeper dive there. If not, we continue with sort of, well, what's happening in the background of your life now? What are the sort of circumstances happening down on the ground? You know, why does work feel like such a pain in the neck this year? I mean, it's usually something. We talk about that and when that could change and what to pay attention to during that time. You can dig pretty deep and sort of peel back what's going on in those situations. And then we take a look at the year ahead. What could be coming up? What are the cycles that are happening? When could be a good time to achieve what you want to achieve? Somebody recently was wondering, well, you know, I'm thinking about buying a house upstate and I'm waiting to hear about the mortgage. And I thought, well, if the mortgage comes through, great. I'm not sure you want this house right now. Maybe you do. You know, go for it. But a better time will be in March when things will have shifted and there'll be other things highlighted in the chart that will provide probably a more favorable time to choose a house and to purchase a house. So it's that sort of thing that we go through.
So questions from anybody, please feel free to just unmute yourself and ask away. Don't all jump at once now.
Okay, I'll ask a question.
Great.
So I'm not, I mean, I have a very close friend who is very into astrology and she tries to give me lots of advice and very often it's correct, but my whole, you know, my whole sort of aspect of astrology is I'm a Libra. So, you know, you go to the astrology zone and every single Libra has the same prediction for the month. I mean, a lot of it, I mean, what does the fact that I'm a Libra mean in terms, if it's all about a chart, being a Libra is probably irrelevant. It's this much, right? I mean, it's not.
Yeah, your being a Libra is important because it establishes your ego and your identity and you seek balance. In many areas of your life, particularly where your sun is located. And if, you know, and if it's on an angle, it would be on an important part of your life, like your home or your career. But there's a lot more. Your moon would tell me, you know, your moon might be in Aries. And so you seek harmony and balance and you're a natural diplomat outwardly, but inwardly and your needs would be a little bit more feisty and maybe a little bit more rebellious if you had your moon in Aries, for example. And then your Venus could be, I'm going to choose a negative example just because it illustrates this a lot better. Your Venus might be in Virgo. So you might say to your, you know, someone with whom you're in a relationship, you know, you don't really do the dishes correctly. And, you know, could you fold the laundry better? And I'm telling you all of this because I love you. And that's not very Libran, but in fact, you're actually expressing your love through improvement. So that's just kind of a crude example of, you know, we're multidimensional, and it's vast.
So the fact is that if you're, you know your birth sign, it's just one very small aspect of the whole picture.
It's a part of the whole.
Right.
It sets the stage for the rest of it. I mean, it's an important part. But if you're reading Astrology Zone, read it for Libra, but also find out what your rising sign is.
Leo.
Okay, read both of those. And they'll probably both resonate in some way, kind of average the two. But you'll probably find that they complement each other in a funky way that resonates with you.
Okay.
And that's a good combination. They're sextile, so that's not a bad combination. Air and fire
There you go.
go well. So that's some nice
Creates a lot of
harmony for you.
smoke.
Pardon?
Creates a lot of smoke.
Yeah, well, yeah, but no, but that creates that's a harmonious. That's a good combination.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Your moon would tell a lot more. Mars would tell. There's a lot more to it.
Yeah. Thank you.
So.
Michelle, did you have a question? You unmuted for
I did, yeah.
All right.
Basically, I had an astrology chart done a few years back.
Yeah.
And it was like 13 pages. I mean,
Oh,
it was
yeah.
humongous. But what I realized afterwards is my birth hour was off. Like maybe, because I wasn't sure of my exact birth hour at that point. So I said, I know it was early morning. It might have been 5 or 6. Well, it turns out I was off like by 2 hours. Would that make a huge difference in the chart?
Probably, yeah, it would.
Okay.
Because what it does is it changes the houses.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had Mars in the first house, for example, you'd probably be a pretty feisty person.
Right.
And there might be some quality of impulsiveness in how you approach things.
Mm-hmm.
2 hours later, that Mars would be in probably, hang on, I have to think for a minute. That Mars would be in the,
different house.
you're testing me now. It would be in a different house. So let's say it would be in the 3rd house.
Yeah.
That might make your communication and the way you connect and communicate more active.
Okay.
Or if it were in this, it wouldn't get to the 7th, but if it were in the 7th, say, you might be aggressive, but take it out on your partner. If it were in the 10th, you would be very ambitious, probably around your career. So the house placements are important.
Okay.
And
Yeah, I mean, I found it was
would affect that.
fascinating, and it was pretty accurate, to be honest with you. It was pretty accurate, except she did a lot of the back life regression, past lives regression, which I'm a firm believer in anyway, so it helped me. But
that's an interesting area that I have not studied.
Yeah.
I haven't gone there, but I know
Yeah.
where it's from. It comes from the north and south node in that axis.
right.
I use that axis as a path for where your soul wants to go.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm never sure how open people are to past lives. So I tiptoe into it and I see if it resonates, okay, we'll go there.
Right.
If not, I leave it as this sort of, kind of, in a way, it's your heart's desire. It's really truly what you want to be in this life.
Right.
And I usually bring it up, and I'll talk about it until I'm convinced that the person is either responding to it, in case we'll go there, and if they're not, then we drop it and we'll go, and we'll
It's
plenty of other things to talk about. Right.
Exactly.
Yeah. And sometimes it comes up later, like you might suggest it, and then, I'll see somebody afterwards and they'll say, that thing you were talking about, it'll pop up later.
Yeah.
So we might address it at a reading 6 months or a year after.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So it's funny how, you become conscious of things in your life as you move through life.
Well, that's what I find interesting, because I just reread it. I hadn't read it in a few years, and it made a lot of reference to me being involved with writing. And back then I wasn't. Now I'm totally into it. So I'm saying, okay, there was some facts to this, you know. So how do we get in touch with you to get a private reading?
My email address is howard@howardastrologer.com,
Okay.
and my website is howardastrologer.com.
Okay. howardastrologer.com for both your email and your,
And the email is howard@howardastrologer.com.
I just put it in the chat.
oh, thanks.
And you can always Google Howard for his Howard Moore with an E, Moore, astrologer. He's
Mhm.
like the first thing that pops up if you Google that.
Okay.
I think I come up. Am I?
Yep.
Did you Google me? Oh, great.
If you go back to the emails that I sent earlier about this,
Yeah. Is it in there?
I have him linked. There's a place where if you just click it, like his name is highlighted
Yes.
and underlined, and that's where you can just click and get into his website from there.
Okay. Terrific.
And if all else fails, Abby knows where to find me.
Right. Okay.
And I can, if everybody wants, I can blind BCC everybody and just reintroduce you, and that way you'll have that 15% kind of discount right away. You won't have to worry about finding him. I can connect you with him immediately. Anybody else? Any questions? Okay, so final question, Howard.
Yes.
Is Trump going to be reelected?
Oh boy. You know, I wondered about trotting all of that out. It's a tough call, and it's a tough call this year. And our astrologers are notorious for getting this wrong. I was looking at the charts actually over the weekend. Kamala Harris actually has the strongest chart, believe it or not, followed by Biden. Trump's having a tough time astrologically.
Oh, poor baby.
Yeah, exactly.
It breaks our heart.
So yeah, I don't actually astrologically. I will say I don't envy him. I'm being diplomatic. So I think I'll leave it there.
Okay.
But the election's going to be very messy.
Yes.
So
Yes.
we don't need an astrologer for that, but yeah, it's all reflected.
There are enough Senate Republican votes to push it on any.
Mark, did you have a question? Hold on, you have to unmute yourself. Unmute. Mark, unmute yourself. It's one of my regular clients. Mark, unmute.
I just got my tech expert. I'm just curious. I mean, my life study has been historical.
Yeah.
And I'm just curious if there are astrologers from, let's say the Renaissance, where I think astrology was pretty big, and the medieval period and the Greeks and Romans that, do you have names that you refer to, or are there some astrologers from the past who seem to be really exceptional?
Well, there are many, and there's a big interest now in Hellenistic astrology. Actually, over the last, say, 15, 20 years, especially, but this new generation of astrologers coming up now,
Yeah.
There's a strong focus, and they're actually starting with studying Hellenistic astrology. So Ptolemy and the Tetrabiblos that he wrote. He was an astronomer. He was many things, but astrology was rolled into that. And astrology played a much larger role just in the general knowledge and general science. Certainly during the Hellenistic period, but in other periods as well. It started back with the Macedonians. and they would observe and record the movement of the stars, the sun and the moon, eclipses, all of that. They came up with some early, they came up with the rudimentary zodiac. All of that was refined during the Hellenistic time period. A lot of knowledge was distributed with Alexander the Great, and it spread throughout the Middle East. And there was a lot going on in Egypt. And then, yes, during, it would sort of wax and wane. And then during the Middle Ages, there was a lot that was written. A lot of ancient texts were translated into Latin and French. So every few hundred years, there's been sort of a resurgence, and also new contributions to knowledge. And then even in the 17th century, there was a lot going on in England and in France. And then it sort of exploded in the 20th century. So it has a rich history.
Yeah.
And there's a lot written just about the history of astrology.
Right.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, I'm sure it is. Yeah, it does strike me as what you've been saying. It sort of reminds me like therapy, where you're sort of like, they'll tell you you have these backgrounds and you have these tensions, and then the tensions don't change, they're still there, but because you know about them, that presumably you can then compensate for them. But it strikes me that
I 100% concur with that. I mean, to me, when I had my chart done by Howard a few months ago, I felt like I had been through several therapy sessions, and I was like, oh, ready to, felt more mentally ready. Even when I was going through that rough patch right before my birthday, I was like, oh, right, Howard said that was going to be a tough time.
right.
And it actually helped me because I knew it was going to come to an end. He said, it's going to be like a couple of days, and then on your birthday, it's going to feel better. And then it was like, on my birthday, I did feel better, so
Right.
I really resonate with that thought that you just said there, Mark, about sort of having a therapeutic element to it. Yeah. Any other questions, everyone? Because I think it's getting to be dinner time. My cats are scratching at the door, waiting to be fed. Not that it's all about them, but Tina, Heidi, Carolyn, I didn't know if anybody wanted to mention anything before we get rolling. Howard, this is amazing. I did record this, so if anyone would like a copy of the recording, just shoot me an email. I'm happy to send you a copy of the recording. Any last thoughts, questions, concerns?
Okay, well, thank you very much.
Howard,
Somebody.
See, I know,
Please, of course, yes.
I know somebody who, it's actually a question about death and illness. I don't think it's a good idea to know when you're going to die. And I don't know if that's, if that's part of your thing, because my friend and his wife had a astrology reading from a well-known astrologer, and I remember this was like 10 years ago, and he said, well, my reading was really good, he said, but her reading was not, and she did have a very unfortunate death from a very severe type of breast cancer. And I remember that, I remembered him telling me that, and I was saying to myself, there's suggestive thinking, there's reality, there's, a lot of things. But I think that one of the things that fortune tellers do many times to hook people who are weak or who are superstitious or who are not necessarily either of those things, but just a certain type of person, and they'll say, this bad thing is going to happen to you. And then the person is told, you have to come back again, or that you have to do this, you have to do that. So I was wondering how you approach when you see somebody getting a serious illness, or if you don't see that. Is that
If
part
I-
of astrology?
It can be. It often is. You can identify periods of illness, and you can even identify the general nature to some degree of where it's going to be. I'm very careful about that because it isn't always illness. It can manifest in other ways. When you see a particular uh, planetary arrangement, an aspect, it can be a couple of different things. Although there are some that are, that strongly suggest a medical issue. All I will say is just make sure you've had a checkup. And that's pretty much as far as I will go. Or I might say this could be a time where there could be some health issues. So have it looked into. There have been times where I've said, if it's going to be a health issue, because it could be other things, it could relate to bones, or it could be something eliminatory, or sometimes the planets indicate what the possibilities are. But I'm not a physician, and I don't pretend to be one. So that's as far as I'll go. And I'll just say,
So
have it checked out.
do you actually think that by you giving, so what you're saying is, and I don't really understand astrology that well, but at all, as a matter of fact, but
Okay.
if something is in the stars, and so you think you can interfere what is in the stars? In other words, if this is said to be happening 5 years from now, or that this is, I don't know if a chart shows your lifespan, but, or if it shows whatever, but I think many people look at a chart as over the course of their life. Do you think that you can interfere with it by saying get a checkup, and the person could change something that's already in the chart? Or do you think that that's, I mean, it's just I think that's what people secretly think anyway, so I'm just asking.
We can make the best of situations that are less than ideal. I don't like to look at something and judge whether it's going to be good or bad. But there are times when things are uncomfortable. There are times when maybe configurations in the chart that don't look comfortable to me are highlighted, and you'll have to deal with them. So I point those times out. You could feel some stress around this or that during these periods. It could be an illness.
I'm saying that if you, that in a way, it could be sort of like preventative medicine to a degree, if you want to take it to that.
The idea is to make the best of whatever situation you're in. So yeah, mitigating.
Well, sort of like what I was saying, and of course we're talking about something totally superficial compared to what your example is, Carolyn. But as I mentioned, Howard had said several months prior that I was going to have kind of a really difficult week, the week before my birthday. So it wasn't that he's like,
Yeah.
so therefore go somewhere and make it better. It was more like,
Prepare yourself.
when I was in it, I'm like, oh, that's right. It's
Right,
kind of a lousy week for me. And it just made me know that I wasn't, like it wasn't anything that I could have really controlled.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, knowing that I was going to go through it,
Right.
And quite honestly, thinking back to when my mom was sick, and obviously Howard is a close friend of the family, Howard knew that my mother was going to her doctor's appointments and doing everything that she was supposed to be doing, appropriate to what the guidelines were as the doctor, you know, but Howard never was able to give us any particular, you know, sign or something that, you
Right.
know, of a date or anything like that of when my mother would pass or anything like that. So, and if he had been able to, I doubt he would have, you know.
I couldn't, no, I wouldn't have, and I didn't want to. um,
But I think,
another example, just to that, a couple of years ago, my mother was walking her dogs and she got pulled down and she broke her ankle. So I was looking in her chart to see what it was, and it turns out it was Mars making a minor aspect to Mercury, which is her ruler. She's a Gemini rising. And, you know, that could do it, but that's not something that would come up in a reading. Mars moves too quickly, first of all. We don't really do that. And, I mean, we wouldn't cover that. It's too detailed. And that particular aspect is not something you'd really pay attention to. That's sort of like you'd have an argument with somebody on a day that happened. So I was a little surprised to find that, and I thought about it a little bit more. And I realized in the course of her recovery, she and my stepfather became a lot closer. And their relationship really changed around her having broken her ankle. And it wasn't just temporary. Like they worked a lot of stuff that they needed to work out in their relationship during that time. They became much more aware of each other's needs, much more responsive to each other. It really ended up bringing them much closer together. In a way, it didn't exactly save their marriage, but it went a long way. That's what that break was about. And indeed, there was another larger indicator in her chart about relationships. So sometimes something over here is really telling you, this is where you need to pay attention. This is just like a trigger.
so is there, Howard, some sort of a type of code of ethics for
Yes.
astrologers? So in a way, that seems sort of like at the foundation of what Carolyn was asking, I think, is that it sounds to me like the astrologer that her friends saw kind of crossed a barrier, maybe crossed a line a little bit.
There are a couple of organizations of astrologers, and each has a code of ethics. There's ISAR, and then there's the NCGR. And both of them lay out specifically how to talk about illness, and then also warning that death is not to be predicted, and that's not to come up. In studying charts of people who've passed away, it comes up in different ways. It isn't always it isn't always like Pluto coming to your moon, the heavy weight of the chart coming to, one of the most sensitive points of your chart that you might imagine. Sometimes it's Jupiter, which is usually good, and would often indicate a long journey, for example. And also, or it could be Venus going retrograde, which could just be a peaceful relief for something. So it happens in different ways in different charts. And it's also not necessarily considered a horrible, nasty, violent ending. Some people who are unwell, some people who are sick and who have terminal illness, it's a relief to go. And it can be reflected that way. But no, we don't predict those dates.
Well, on that happy note, everyone. But I think that was a really, that ultimately was a great question, because I think, I think once again, if you're using like the daily news, or you're using, whatever, some monthly horoscope, whatever, they're just putting out really very generalized stuff.
Right.
And, there is, that's, I think the fact that there is a code of ethics to this is also very important. So cool. Well, I sure learned a lot. I hope everybody
Yes.
else got something out of it. And I'll connect you all. And once again, if you would like a recording of this, just let me know. I'd be happy to send it along.
Okay.